I'm very excited about this. I'm going to make this a very short introduction because I think my next guest has achieved sainthood in Romania and probably needs no introduction. But I'm going to do a short one just for the 2 or 3 of you that might need a refresher. Psychotherapist and New York Times bestselling author Esther Perel is recognized as one of today's most insightful and original voices on modern relationships. Fluent in 9 languages, she leads a therapy practice in New York City and serves as an organizational consultant for Fortune 500 companies around the world. Her celebrated TED Talks have garnered more than 27 million views. How many of you are among those 27 million? I thought so. And her international bestseller, Mating in Captivity, Unlocking Erotic Intelligence, is a global phenomenon that has been translated into 25 languages, more than Esther even speaks. Her newest book is the New York Times bestseller, The State of Affairs, Rethinking Infidelity. Esther is also executive producer and host of the award-winning podcast, Where Should We Begin? You can learn more at estherperel.com or by following her on Instagram. She's pretty active. I tag her sometimes at Esther Perel Official on Instagram. She is one of the most insightful, curious people I know, and I am so excited to call her among one of my new friends. So back again for what is sure to be another insightful, no bullshit, ask me anything session. Please welcome to the stage Esther Perel.
Okay, can we have some light in the auditorium, please? This is not a talk, so I need to see you, because we're going to do a session. Can we get some light more so I can see the people and not be blinded? All right, just like it was before, just turn on the light. Okay, light on the audience. All right, it's going to be the night session. All right, so people, this is really not a talk. It's actually a continuation of a number of different conversations that have already been ongoing here. The conversations about dating, the conversations about AI and relationship, the conversations about what is the price of efficiency in life and in relationship versus the importance of aesthetics and depth in life or in relationships. And here's what I want to do. I want to take 10 questions, and then I'm going to answer them. So we're going to do it in reverse. Instead of talking and Q&A, I want you to take literally 3 minutes with somebody that's sitting next to you and discuss what you think would be a very important question that needs to be asked, not because it's relevant only to you, but because it's relevant to all of us. Go. Okay? All right. So, let's start. Question number 1, and it has to be 1 sentence, a question. Okay? Where are the mics? Can we have more than 1 mic so that we don't have to run through the whole and make this faster? Yep, go.
What does healthy polygamy look like?
What does healthy polygamy?
Healthy polygamy look like?
So here's the thing, people. Polygamy is probably not the right word, because in and of itself, I'm sorry to say, it is not a healthy system. It is a very one-sided system of one man, many women. So I think if we're going to talk about one plus plural, we should probably make it an equal opportunity proposition. Go. To give him another one. Yep, go ahead.
How can you approach people without having the fear of being rejected?
You can't. The question is how much, to what degree, but...
My question, sorry. Yes, my question is how to say no without hurting the other.
The one is asking for politically correct rejection. You say no without what?
Without hurting the other.
That is impossible.
Well, I don't think
I
it's
mean,
impossible.
it depends. If the other wants you very much, you cannot avoid the pains or the pleasures of love or relationships. I mean, you can do it nicer. You can do it nicer. Like Logan was talking about ghosting, that's not nice. You can do it nicer. But the idea that you can do it and it won't hurt is just, it's like putting sugar in a cake and hoping it won't be sweet, but in reverse. Okay.
So how can I cope with the hurt of the other?
That's
Okay.
yes, how do I do it? And tolerate. Go ahead.
Having in mind the professions of you and your husband, of you and Jack,
Yes.
do you fight in a scientific way?
Merci. I mean, the question is really, are you normal people? Do you do what everybody does? No, we do it better because we have learned from every couple we have seen. So when we want to go at it, we know every dirty trick. No, seriously, I won't count this question because there's not much to say. Yes, go ahead.
Can I go? My question relates to the one before. Is marriage or monogamy obsolete in this day and age where we are so free? We're going to be free. One of our physical restrictions, like Moran said, and I'm relating it to everything that was communicated these days. We will be very, very free in the following years. So in this day and age, is marriage an obsolete notion?
Got it. Thank you. Yes.
Hi. So what do you think are the biggest challenges for people starting to date nowadays, and how do we overcome them?
Can I ask you something? Do you even have the word dating in Romanian?
Yeah.
What is the word?
Dating.
No, because, by the way, it doesn't exist in French. It doesn't exist in French, it doesn't exist in Spanish, it doesn't exist in many other, so, no, it's not the same. It's not the same. Dating is a codified system. There is the dating with lunch, and then there is the dating with drinks, and then there's the dating with dinner, and every single one of them has a different connotation of level of interest. That kind of thing does not travel. It's too Protestant. All right, let's go.
I have a question related to everything that happens here, because I feel that people communicate so much better in this atmosphere at Unfinished, but what do you do when you go outside? And how do you take this experience and put it out there and communicate with others, because I feel there is a big gap between this kind of communication and people not taking the heads off their phones.
Great. Two more. Go there. I can't see you really, but I know there's a hand there. Oh God, that mic has to travel. Okay. Is there somebody else who has a mic in the meantime?
Hi.
That was a hijacking. It was on its way somewhere else.
Sorry.
Yes. No, you're not, actually. You're very happy.
That's a good one, thank you. Well, it comes
See,
from
don't think it's all authentic here. Yeah.
It comes slightly from a personal perspective. How do you tell someone really close, like a family member, who is in her 60s, to be careful not to get hurt when she's going out there dating a married man?
Say that again, sorry.
How do you tell
Go ahead.
someone very close, who's in her 60s, to be very careful when she's going dating or seeing another man, not to get hurt? And to complicate things a little bit, the man is married.
And it's your mother?
Yes.
Don't laugh. Don't
No,
laugh.
no, no. That's
Don't
why.
laugh.
That's
this
why.
is not the right moment, actually.
That's why.
Because I think it's a magnificent question. And yes. Okay, one more.
Here, in the back.
Yes.
Most of our life we are preparing and we are trying to build the relationships, but at one point in our life we will lose that person. Can we do something to be prepared for that moment?
Okay. All right, shall we? Is it really not possible to lower these huge spotlights so I can see people? I like to kind of talk to you. But it's very interesting because we have a few questions that are about rejection and loss and the hurts of love or relationships and the protection against what you imagine will be a bad finale. So I'm going to cluster a number of these questions together, and then maybe we start with the monogamy marriage, because it goes also with the, I think you wanted to say polyamory, I would imagine. Whatever sounds better. So, look, I think we've had plenty of conversations in some way on the apps and on the AI and on the algorithms and all of that. So I'm going to wear the hat of the couples therapist that I am. And I'm going to actually, talk from that angle. That doesn't mean that the people in my office don't use apps, and it doesn't mean that their parents haven't texted the children for years so that they're having a harder time having an eye-to-eye conversation to begin with. But I think when you ask the question, is marriage obsolete? My suspicion is that sometimes you think that marriage has been this one monolithic thing. And marriage itself and monogamy are two words that have been used since the beginning of humanity, but they mean something completely different today. And when I say today, I think in Romania it's not difficult to just simply think during communism, post-communism. You don't have to go back more than, 91 or 89 for that matter. So marriage was an economic, I think marriage has gone to three major stages. For most of history, it was an economic institution, and till recently here. And that meant people married in order to have families, sex was for reproduction, it was a woman's marital duty, it was for people got together for status, for companionship, for economic support, And if love ever existed there, that was a bonus, but it certainly was not part of neither the origin story nor the staying story. And in addition, marriage was a no-exit enterprise. You married once, it was for life, and if you didn't like it, well, tough you. You could always fantasize about an early death of your partner. You know, you were stuck. And men had a way out because there was a double standard, because there was polygamy, but it wasn't called polygamy, it just was called being a man. And therefore, they had many alternative lives and double lives, and women most of the times could not, because they were the property of these men, because they couldn't necessarily have their own bank accounts, because they couldn't go out and be independent enough to actually be able to leave. And all of this really, in most Western countries, before, except for the Eastern European countries or the Eastern Bloc, changed in the 60s, in the late 60s, early 70s. This is not a long time. Then we have a marriage that is the romantic marriage, and that wants, you know, to have a feeling of belonging, and it wants love, and it wants to democratize love, and for the first time, sex is no longer just a duty, it's about desire, and it's if you're not going to have 8 children, but you're only going to have 2 children or 3 children, then you need a different motivation to be sexual, and that means that you're going to have sex for pleasure and for connection. And it becomes more of an egalitarian model, more of. I'm not implying any of a full realization. And in that model, we can leave. For the first time, we can leave. And if for a long time people left when they were miserable and they were really unhappy, we have now evolved to a way of thinking about relationships and marriage in which we don't just leave because we are unhappy, but we also leave because we think we could be happier. And for that, something else took place that was really important, is that we brought happiness down from the heavens. For most of history, happiness was for the afterlife. You suffered well on earth, and if you did a good job at it, you could hope for a better next turn. But this thing about bringing happiness down, having talks about happiness, and thinking that it is not just an option, but it is actually a right and a mandate, that is a completely new conception of life and of what, therefore, we think we can expect from relationships, from our committed relationships, or from our dating life, for that matter. When I say marriage, I really am not thinking about just legal marriage. I'm just thinking about long-term or committed relationships of any kind, straight, gay, trans, 2 or more people, for that matter. I think the next model of marriage that has evolved is the identity marriage. And the identity marriage takes place 10 years later often than it used to, not too long ago. You know, in the 60s, in the US, 80% who were in their 20s were married. Today, 20% of people in their 20s are married. So imagine how many years of relational nomadism and life we can go, you know, until we decide that we find, as we've been hearing about this, the one, the soulmate, and all of that. The identity marriage is basically, you're going to help me become the best version of myself. And that's a real new Olympus, you know. And that brings a whole different set of expectations. So marriage is the same word, and yet it has never meant the same. And today it lives with unprecedented expectations. Never have people poured more expectations into this thing called marriage or relationships, etc. To the point of the soulmate. I mean, the soulmate, what you've been hearing in this conference a lot is how much secularization didn't make religion go away. It just displaced it. It displaced it in AI, and what Alec was talking earlier about the icons and about the gurus and the prophets and the angel investors. This religion thing isn't going away. It's just that now we don't call God the soulmate, only we call the partner that we're looking for the soulmate. And we conflate the spiritual and the relational. We want ecstasy and meaning and transcendence and purpose with one person. Everything that people used to go for in the realm of the divine. Monogamy, that's your next thing about monogamy. Monogamy, listen, for most of history, monogamy was one person for life. Today, monogamy is one person at a time. And so many people here have said, I am monogamous in all my relationships, plural. And it's supposed to make a lot of sense, you know, and then we want to even still be monogamous, but emotionally monogamous while maybe being sexually, consensually non-monogamous, or even to, you know, to have a primary commitment in one place, but to have polyamorous relationships where we actually experience the recreation of community through a multiplicity of deep attachments and love relationships. So nothing is obsolete, is really what I'm trying to say to you. It's just in perpetual motion. It gets redefined all the time because people need bonding, because people need to create safe havens. Hopefully they think, at least when they start, that their relationship will become that safe haven where they can cultivate their roots and their anchor and their stability and their security so that they can go then and experience the other dimension of life, which is the novelty, the change, the exploration, the discovery, and all of that. And for that, it will not change. It will take on new forms. There will always be marriage or a version of it that gives people those needs, because the fundamental human needs won't change. The form will change. So the polyamory thing is basically a continuation of the conversation of monogamy. The polyamorous conversation or the non-monogamous conversation of today is basically the conversation about virginity 60 years ago. But 60 years ago, people were talking about the idea of being able to have premarital sex, to be able to actually not have to marry in order to have sex. That was what your parents or grandparents did. They married to have sex. Today, you marry and you stop having sex with others. You know. So the conversation is about the boundaries. It's about what makes commitment. And what are the promises that people need to make for each other in order to experience that sense of commitment, of loyalty, of trust, the very basic human needs we want. And it doesn't change. Polyamorous couples talk about trust and boundaries and loyalty and jealousy and closeness and intimacy, no different from anybody else. The structure is different. The conversation about the fundamental human needs is no different. And I think if we begin to look at it like that, we won't have this idea that there are closed relationships and open relationships, and they're only measured by how much the door is either locked or open. It's really a false dichotomy in my idea. By the way, when I say in my idea, it means I can sound really confident when I speak to you, but I don't think I'm right about anything. Just really very clear. This doesn't mean that I'm right. It doesn't mean it's true. And come back next year and maybe I'll have something else to say. It's just the thought of the moment about the questions that you're asking. You know? So there's no prophet standing here and telling you this is the law from Sinai. You know, it's really, it has to be, we're in the same conversation, which is why, I fight like you. I have the same questions as everybody. Don't think that there is that voice there that, okay. The thing about rejection and the thing about, I think that a few things have been said by Logan and Moran that I think really are very much to the point, you know. And that's why I love the question that followed, which was, how can I say no and tolerate the pain that I may be inflicting on the person that I'm saying no to? And in a way, you could almost divide this question between its analog version and its digital version. Because the digital version sanitizes us from actually having to see or hear the pain of the other. You know, you used to hear somebody beginning to cry, even if it was just on a phone. You used to see a face that begins to break down and just goes into deformation from such disappointment and such loss. But if you just do a delete or a ghosting or even an icing and a simmering, which are the kind of intermediate stages of putting people on hold, there is no way that we can live in the capitalist society that we live in and not suffer our own commodification, unfortunately. You know, we do romantic consumerism and we go on an app, you know, to go find this one and only, and it's kind of a form of emotional capitalism. And so when people reject these days, it just feels like it's cold. It's easy. It's without, I mean, for lack of a use of a better word, empathy. It's a lack of heart about the way that some of this sometimes happen. However, I still think there is no way that you won't be hurt when you are rejected. Sometimes it's done worse and sometimes it's done more kindly, but rejection hurts. The same way that if I am happy, I do this. And you say, it's obvious, she smiles when she's pleased. And I do this when it hurts, and my body will show it. How can you imagine that the rejection won't contract you? And it doesn't just contract my body, it contracts my vision, my hope, my sense of what life can still bring me for a while. And the beauty of us is that we are able to be so resilient and so imaginative that we can deal with the deepest losses and somehow find a way to continue, to hope again, to love again, to be close again, to make love again. And that has been the cycles of life. And what helps us? The poets have helped us, music has helped us, nature has helped us, art has helped us, our friends have helped us, sometimes our family helps us, and every once in a while psychotherapy. But psychotherapy is not the number one. It lives amongst all these other things. There's a reason that all these songs, poems, novels have been written, because they help us. They carry us through these experiences where we don't think there is any exit, and yet there is. So the hardest thing, yes, is to be able to tolerate that you want to do something for you that will serve you, but will actually maybe hurt another. And to be able to know it's unbearable sometimes to hurt another person, and to know that you're doing something that is painful without it meaning that you are by nature a bad person or an evil person. But it's very challenging. This is the question, though, that I would broaden. It's not just, how do I tolerate the pain that I inflict on others? It's also, how do I tolerate another person having their own deep experience next to me when it isn't reflective of mine? And this is probably one of the greatest things in relationships. If you had asked one of the questions of what are the important ingredients, this is one of the most important ingredients. Is the ability to make space for another person to be with themselves in your presence. And the same way that you want to be able to be there for them without losing you. I think I may even have said this once here. I always think that one of the very interesting dynamics in a relationship is that there's often one person that is more afraid of losing themselves and one person who is more afraid of losing the other. One person more in touch with the fear of abandonment and one person more in touch with the fear of suffocation. When you leave, you're often more in touch with yourself. Whatever the reasons, you may think that you're saving your life. But in effect, you are doing it for you. And you are rejecting another person or abandoning another person. All of that. The biggest challenge for people dating, I think it's the same challenge as people who are in relationships. I mean, I am from the IRL world in real life. I go every day up 22 floors in the elevator to my office. There's about 7-8 people in the elevator, and it is rare that anybody lifts their head and even speaks to each other. And now on top of it, they put a screen in the elevator, so if they don't have a phone, they're looking at a screen. And I'm thinking, where do we go? So I think this goes directly to your question about how do we leave here and take the quality of interaction that we have here. You can take this with you in so many ways, You can meet with friends and actually have a deeper conversation than the usual chit-chat. And have a dinner and actually ask us a question that unifies the conversation. We did it the first evening here with some of the speakers, and we could have just said, and made a lot of noise and two people talking, and then we just basically asked, what was on your mind in coming here this morning? And about 20 of us told completely different stories, and so moving, things we would not have imagined were going to be told. But what was special wasn't just what they said, it was the quality of the listening that they received. You know, I often think that one of the few places left where people can have 1 hour of undivided attention that is device-free is in the psychotherapist office. That's crazy. So you can say, we do a dinner and everybody keeps their phones off the table and off in their bags so that when they go to the bathroom, they're not taking their phones with them, you know, to go and check on it. You really need to think of this as countercultural and own it and not be apologetic about it, because you know that the quality of the connection, the communication, the experience that you're going to have will be superior. Trust it. The same way that you trust the dish that you've just cooked. Or maybe not, but it doesn't matter. You know, some of you do. Just trust it, that if you create an interaction that has more quality to it, and that quality today is one word: attention. That is the main economy. That's the main currency of the moment, attention. This is what you're doing with me now. This is what I want you to do with the people in your life afterwards and ask them to do for you. And they'll thank you the same way that I will thank you. It's not new, but it's becoming a rare commodity. I think that when people, you know, I mean, when you say what people can do when they date, the question for me is always, we're talking about meeting people or we're talking about what happens after you meet people? I think what I have noticed in many places, at least in the States, is that a lot of the dates are like job interviews. It's awful. There is just zero poetry to it. There's zero imagination. It's a bunch of questions that people ask each other. Do something. Be in motion. Don't sit just at a table and look at each other face to face. Create an activity, and that activity will create something to talk about. And more importantly, what is really so strange about modern dating is that it is done one-on-one. And the best way to actually get to know somebody is when you bring them in the midst of your group. That's what the old dating system was about. You brought somebody to the family and everybody checked. Now, I'm not saying you need to check, but imagine that instead of saying we're going on a date one-on-one, you actually said, I'm meeting my friends, we're going to do whatever you're going to do, join us. And watch that person in interaction. You will get so much more interesting material than just sitting in front of them and asking, and when did you arrive here, and how long have you been living here, and what are you doing, and do you plan to stay in this? I mean, c'est insupportable. It's just so fucking boring. What do we do after? Yes, okay. Look, I think the question about your mother is so touchy, because it could be your mother, it could be your sister, it could be your best friend. It's like, I think it's one of the most complex things in a relationship, is to know if when you think you are protecting someone, you are actually really protecting them. I don't know the story of your mother one bit, right? So I'm going to talk in general. It's like, imagine that somebody hasn't had anybody pay any attention to them in decades. And for the first time, someone is actually nice to them, just nice. Maybe that person has lived alone, maybe that person is widowed, maybe that person is divorced, maybe that person lives with somebody who doesn't say hello, goodbye. And that person, if you tell them you're going to get hurt, or you're going to tell them it's wrong, or you're going to tell them he's married, or you're going to tell him he will never leave, it doesn't register. Because what they're going to feel in the next hour when they go that evening or that afternoon is food for the soul at such a level that they are willing to take all the risks. And here is the interesting thing. So much of the dating stuff that we've discussed here, to me, I've rarely heard love described in more risk-averse terms. I've never seen anything like this. I mean, trust is an active engagement with the unknown, says Rachel Botsman. I think it's really that. It's a leap of faith. If you need to control everything, if you need to know anything, where do you develop the trust? And yet, this kind of situation that you describe, where people throw themselves into something that could just destroy them, is a risk that people have been taking since the beginning of humanity, and no amount of reasoning has ever really stopped them. Afterwards, there'll be a puddle in your lap, and they'll ask you, why didn't you tell me? And you'll say, I did. And they say, but you didn't say it strong enough. And you say, I did. And it's one of these unavoidable things that you watch and you watch. So you do your job, you do the due diligence, and at the same time, it is possible that the person says, yes, 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 I hear you, tonight I stop, tonight I stop. They come back, they don't stop. 6 months later, tonight I stop. It's like a cigarette. But not because I think that love is a cigarette, because because of the thing that Moran so beautifully describes, is that dissociated space in between the moment where you say, I'm not going to do it, and the moment that you do it, and the moment you think I shouldn't have done it. And it's just an unbelievable thing. If you think that it's powerful with food, the way he was describing on day one, imagine what it's like with love. And one of the most difficult things is to see someone who you think is voluntarily getting hurt, and you can't stop him. And you love her, or you don't, or whatever it is, you love the person, or you feel responsible for the person. You hope that the guy doesn't promise for the next 6 years that he's going to leave his family to come and be with her, and blah, 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 blah. And you know that as long as she goes back, he can promise and do nothing. And there's a reason that Dostoevsky wrote what he wrote, and everybody else, and it's just, Now, I do think, depending on the relationship you have with people, that you can try to reason with them, but it all depends on context. I think here's the thing. For many of your questions, these are not, I have a different view on this. The reason I can never say do this, do that, is because I need to know the story. Relationships take place in a context. Relationships are stories. And I cannot know what is the next paragraph to the story without knowing where the story comes from. So, you take from me what you think can apply here, in terms of, because it was so important the way you said, this woman is in her 60s. That means that is an entire economic message you just said. Not just a gender message, an economic message, a value proposition message. It's loaded. If you said he's a 60-year-old man or 66-year-old man, it has a completely different meaning. You agree? You understand what I'm saying? And of course, implied there is, this hasn't happened to her in a long time, I thought. And then implied there is, I don't want him to take advantage of her. That's also an economic proposition. Economy of the heart and economy of a lot of other things. And then implied is there is another marriage there, that means that there are other people whose hearts can also be broken. This is a complex system. It's a very complex system, and we have no idea what goes on in his relationship that makes him want to be with your mother, that makes your mother willing to accept this. And so always ask for the text before you deliver any piece of advice. The text is really important because it's what helps you interpret. That's the way people have studied the Bible forever. Okay, was there one more? No, I don't think there was one more. So I'm going to ask you a question, people, because we have a few minutes. I don't know what time it is. So how much time do we have? No, this started at 30 minutes. It was completely not set. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay. The thing that I am asking myself all the time when I watch the relationship conversations that we've had here and the way that you are listening to them, and especially some of the ones that were asked in the sessions that I did with Jack, what I began think about is the challenge for many of you to begin to write a more individually driven story in a society in which the individual had just about no value for so long. And how you grapple with that. That's the question. I'm all the time thinking, how are they hearing some of the things that we're saying? I know the way Americans hear some of the things we say. I don't always know how you hear it. How, you know, like your question about your mother, that is just about not a question that I would ever get in the States. It's a very interesting thing, you know. And so my question to you is this: how do you hear what I say to you? Where does this land with you? Why does this resonate with you? What's important about it for you? And if I can hear 5 very short little one of those, for anybody who's really thought about that, that would be a beautiful way to end.
I think for me, one of the most important takeaways is how to break the molds of what we've seen in relationships from our parents, our grandparents, aunts, and families, and having the courage to define by myself what a relationship is. And having the courage to say, I don't have to be married before I'm 30, I don't have to be in a monogamous relationship, I get to explore everything that I want, and it's safe, and I have the self-confidence to do it. So, thank you.
And how much do you have to fight a whole stereo system in your head that tells you all the things that are wrong with a woman doing all of that? How many generations of admonitions?
I have 10 aunts. All of them ask me continuously over Easter, Christmas, birthday, name day when I'm getting married.
Oh God, you see.
But I think the difference versus a few years ago was that I don't feel the pressure anymore, because it's not that I don't care about them and their opinion, it's just that I don't want them to define me anymore.
Right. So, thank you. All right. Find another way to get a mic, but can the other one move in the meantime?
Working? Yes.
Yeah.
So what I liked about everything I heard these days, especially from you, is because I heard your speeches before on TEDx and everywhere I had a chance, and this morning too I started to hear your podcast. I understood that our society is not very different from our societies. I understood that the message you sent was it's adapted to our society somehow, and maybe your previous visits here made you understood how we work, and what you said today about our experience before 89 and now after 89. So I appreciated that you adapted your speech to our society, and I think it made me understand that you know what you're talking and who you are talking with.
Thank you. Yes. It's going to come to the back in a minute. I see you. Yeah. You have to talk very loud.
Yes, I will talk very loud.
Yeah.
My feeling is that I'm not crazy, and I'm not just another millennial dragging his past and his problems from others. So it gives me comfort to hear you saying what you're saying, and it makes me actually feel more human again. And it gives me courage to go out there and be human, even if I might be misinterpreted, so not understood. It's okay for me.
Yes. Yeah, I'm listening.
Hi, Esther. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. What I would like to say is, after reading your book, it helps me feel more calmer. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Hi. What I appreciate in your work very much is
I don't fish for compliments, people. It's not that question.
It's very hard to criticize
actually
you.
asking you a cultural translation question.
I've been living like 10, 12 years of my life in very different countries, and what I appreciate very much is I think that you actually have this cross-cultural approach, and everything that you say, it feels very universal, and it might have or might be in connection with the fact that we are all human beings and we struggle at an interpersonal level with very similar questions. But I think that, again, it's very rare to hear from someone this cross-cultural approach in whatever issue that we talk about.
So I'm going to go to the back for 2 more and then we have to stop. But listen, here's the thing. Yeah, I'm going to take you.
Sure.
I do think that having this message with 10 aunts in your back is not the same as being in the middle of Manhattan with nobody around you. The aspirations may be the same, but the proximity of pressure, the proximity of not hurting the people that you love so much and that count on you and blah, 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 blah. All of this, you have got to think about context. You know, I'm going to repeat this again and again. I do think that there is, the messages are entering here, but, and not all of you are from Bucharest. And when you go down and you go back to the countryside, it's another life. It's another century sometimes. And that means that what you're doing, you know, I gave a talk in Delhi, in India, a while back, and I called it Straddling Tinder and Arranged Marriages. Because the same people on Friday night were on an app, and on Saturday they were home in the village, you know, were sitting in the living room with people being paraded in front of them by the parents. That is living cross-culturally. And I think on some level you do live cross-culturally right here as well. I think, you know. Yeah, go ahead, and then we stop. No, you're not having a mic. C'est impossible, ça. Okay, go ahead.
Since last year when I...
Yeah.
So thank you for everything. Since last year when I saw you, I just realized one thing. We think in stereotypes, and this is one thing that you taught me, not to think in profiles. We really have this need to put everybody in a frame, and okay, you're this, you're that. It's not like that. We are all individuals, and we should look at the big picture. Thank you.
Gentlemen, bon appétit. Good night. It's time to go.
Esther Perel.